Get on the ground! You are under arrest!
I didn't do anything! Let go of me!
The morning sun glinted off her briefcase as two officers seized her arms, their fingers digging into her tailored blazer. "Get your ghetto ass away from here," one spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is for real people." She didn't scream. Didn't curse. She simply looked him in the eye as they dragged her down the courthouse steps, her heels scraping concrete, her dignity intact. What they didn't know would destroy them. Wow, thank you so much for watching. Seriously, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, the biggest way you can show me love and encourage me to keep creating is to hit that like button and subscribe. It takes 1 second, but it makes a huge difference. Speaking of more videos, I've got another exciting one lined up for you. Just click on the next video showing right on your screen now to keep the fun going. See you there. Amelia Catherine Richardson had been awake since 4:30 that morning, reviewing case files at her kitchen table while the world outside her Georgetown apartment still slept in darkness. The coffee had gone cold in her favorite mug, the one her late mother had given her when she graduated from Howard Law, but she barely noticed. Today wasn't just another day. Today was the day. At 42 years old, she'd become one of the youngest federal judges appointed to the district court, and certainly one of the few black women to hold such a position. The confirmation process had been brutal, 3 months of scrutiny, background checks that examined every parking ticket, every college essay, every relationship. Senator Patricia Gaines had championed her nomination, calling her a brilliant legal mind with an unwavering moral compass. But others had questioned whether she had enough experience, enough temperament, enough something that they could never quite name but everyone understood. She'd proven them all wrong, of course. 20 years of flawless legal work, from her days as a public defender in Baltimore to her tenure as a federal prosecutor, spoke for itself. Her record on civil rights cases was impeccable. She'd won landmark decisions that had changed policies in 3 states. She'd taught constitutional law at Georgetown. She'd published papers that other lawyers cited in their arguments. And now, this morning, she would preside over her first docket as a sitting federal judge. Amelia had chosen her outfit with deliberate care, a charcoal gray suit from Brooks Brothers, tailored to perfection, with a crisp white blouse and understated pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Professional. Authoritative. Unimpeachable. She'd learned long ago that as a black woman in predominantly white spaces, her appearance would be scrutinized, judged, and used against her if she gave anyone even the smallest opening. So she gave them nothing. The drive from Georgetown to the courthouse took 30 minutes in light traffic. She'd left early, wanting to arrive before the building filled with lawyers, defendants, and court staff. There was something she wanted to do alone, stand in her courtroom, behind the bench, and let the weight of the moment settle into her bones. Her father, a postal worker who died when she was 19, had always told her, "Baby girl, don't just step into a room. Own it. Know it belongs to you before anyone else does." The federal courthouse stood imposing against the gray November sky, all concrete and glass and the weight of American justice. Amelia parked in the designated judge's lot. She still felt a thrill at seeing her name on the reserved spot, and gathered her briefcase and leather portfolio. Inside were her notes for the morning's docket, 2 motions to dismiss, 1 preliminary hearing, and a sentencing. Routine work, but she'd prepared for each case as if it were going before the Supreme Court. She checked her watch, 7:15 a.m. Perfect. She'd have nearly 2 hours before the 9 o'clock docket call. The courthouse steps were empty except for a maintenance worker hosing down the entrance. Amelia climbed them with her head high, her low heels clicking a confident rhythm against the concrete. She'd walked these steps dozens of times as a lawyer. But today was different. Today she walked them as a judge. She was 10 feet from the entrance when she heard the voice behind her. "Hey! You! Stop right there." Amelia turned, confused. A security officer was jogging toward her from the side of the building, one hand on his belt, his face twisted with suspicion. He was white, maybe late 40s, with the kind of thick neck that suggested too many hours at the gym and not enough time reading policy manuals. "Can I help you, officer?" Amelia kept her voice level, professional. "What do you think you're doing?" Officer Marcus Webb, his name tag glinted in the early light, looked her up and down with barely concealed disgust. "Court doesn't open till 8:30. You need to wait on the public side." "I'm not here as a member of the public," Amelia said calmly. She shifted her briefcase to her other hand. "I have business inside." "I bet you do." Webb's lip curled. "Let me guess. Baby daddy got a court date? Child support hearing? Maybe trying to sneak in early to coach him on his lies?" The words hit like a slap, but Amelia had been preparing for moments like this her entire life. She took a slow breath, maintaining eye contact. "Officer, I'm an attorney with business in this building. I have every right to enter." "An attorney?" Webb laughed, harsh and mocking. He moved closer, invading her space. "Right. And I'm the tooth fairy. Look at you, trying to run some kind of scam. This is a federal courthouse, sweetheart. You can't just." "I'm not running any scam." Amelia's voice took on an edge of steel. "And I'm certainly not your sweetheart. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned toward the door, but Webb grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her bicep hard enough to bruise. "I said stop. Remove your hand from me. Now." Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, but her voice remained steady. Years of facing down hostile judges, aggressive prosecutors, and courtroom bullies had taught her never to show fear. "Or what?" Webb tightened his grip. "You gonna call your lawyer?" "Oh wait, you're supposedly a lawyer, right?" He called over his shoulder to another officer who'd emerged from inside. "Johnson. Get over here. Got another one trying to sneak in early." Officer Thomas Johnson approached, younger than Webb, with uncertain eyes that darted between his colleague and Amelia. "What's the situation? This one claims she's a lawyer." Webb's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Says she has business in the building. At 7:15 in the morning. Before the courthouse even opens." "I work here," Amelia said, directing her words to Johnson, hoping he might have more sense than his partner. "I have identification if you'd simply—" "I don't care if you have a library card with a gold star on it," Webb interrupted. "Get your ghetto ass away from here. This is for real people." The words hung in the air, ugly and naked in their racism. Johnson's eyes widened. The maintenance worker had stopped hosing and was staring. A lawyer arriving early for a filing had frozen on the bottom step, mouth open. And Amelia felt something cold and clarifying settle over her. This moment, this exact moment, was what her entire career had been building toward. Not her appointment. Not her first day. This test of whether she would bend, whether she would shrink, whether she would accept the diminishment that men like Marcus Webb tried to force upon women who looked like her. "I will say this one final time," Amelia said, her voice carrying in the morning air. "Remove your hand from my arm. I am entering this building. If you physically prevent me, you will face consequences." Webb's face flushed red. "You threatening me?" "Johnson, cuff her." "Disorderly conduct. Trespassing. Threatening a federal officer." "Marcus, wait," Johnson looked uncertain. "Maybe we should just check her ID. I gave you an order." Webb yanked Amelia forward, making her stumble. Her briefcase fell, papers scattering across the concrete. "This is what's wrong with people like you. Think you can talk your way into places you don't belong. Think you can demand respect you haven't earned. Let go of me." Amelia tried to pull free, but Webb twisted her arm behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. She heard her suit jacket tear. Resisting arrest. That's another charge. Webb was breathing hard now, his face close to hers, his breath hot and sour. You're going to learn today. You're going to learn exactly where you belong. Johnson had moved forward, uncertain but complicit. Together, they forced Amelia's hands behind her back. The metal handcuffs bit into her wrists. She felt her grandmother's pearls pull tight against her neck as Webb shoved her forward. Marcus, this doesn't feel right, Johnson started. Shut up and help me get her out of here. They dragged her down the courthouse steps. Amelia didn't fight, she couldn't, not without giving them the excuse to hurt her more. But she didn't lower her eyes either. She looked at every face that turned to watch, the maintenance worker with his hand over his mouth, the lawyer who'd pressed herself against the railing, a group of law students arriving early who pulled out their phones to record. Look at this, Webb announced to the gathering crowd, his voice performatively loud. This is what happens when you try to disrespect federal property. Doesn't matter who you think you are. Justice is blind, but it ain't stupid. They pushed her toward a courthouse security vehicle parked at the curb. Amelia's heart was racing now, but her mind had gone crystalline and clear. She was memorizing everything. The time, 7:23 a.m. The smell of Webb's cologne, cheap and overpowering. The way Johnson wouldn't meet her eyes. The faces in the crowd. The scrape on her palm from where she tried to catch herself when Webb had pushed her. Most importantly, she was memorizing the feeling. The humiliation. The helplessness. The casual, confident cruelty of men who believed their badges gave them the right to brutalize anyone they deemed beneath them. She would need every detail later. I want your names and badge numbers, Amelia said as they shoved her against the vehicle. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. Both of you. Webb laughed in her face. Oh, you'll get them, sweetheart. Right on your arrest paperwork. Along with a court date where you can explain to a real judge why you thought you could con your way into a federal building. He leaned close, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. And trust me, that judge isn't going to give a damn about your attitude or your fancy suit. He's going to see exactly what I see, just another ghetto queen trying to run a hustle. Amelia looked him dead in the eye. And despite everything, despite the handcuffs cutting into her wrists, despite the torn jacket and the scattered papers, despite the shame burning in her chest, she smiled. It was a small smile. Patient. Almost pitying. Because Marcus Webb had no idea that in less than 2 hours, he was going to learn just how wrong a man could be. The holding cell smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. Amelia sat on the metal bench, her hands finally freed from the handcuffs, and assessed her situation with the same methodical precision she'd once used to prepare cross-examinations. Her watch read 7:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, the courthouse would officially open. In 73 minutes, her docket was scheduled to begin. And somewhere in this building, court staff were probably wondering where the hell their new judge was. The irony would have been funny if her wrists weren't still throbbing. Webb had processed her with theatrical efficiency, barking orders at Johnson while maintaining a running commentary about people who don't know their place. He'd confiscated her briefcase, her portfolio, even her phone, all of which sat tagged and bagged somewhere in evidence. He'd refused to let her make a call, citing standard procedure for uncooperative suspects. When she'd calmly pointed out that she was entitled to contact an attorney, he'd laughed. You can call whoever you want after booking, he'd said. But something tells me your public defender isn't going to be much help with the charges you're facing. Johnson had at least had the decency to look uncomfortable during the whole process. He was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of baby face that suggested he hadn't been doing this job long enough to become completely hardened. When Webb had left to file the initial paperwork, Johnson had approached the cell with cautious steps. Ma'am, he'd said quietly, I need to ask you something. Are you really a lawyer? Amelia had looked at him for a long moment. What do you think, Officer Johnson? I think. He'd glanced over his shoulder, making sure Webb was still gone. I think Marcus might have made a mistake. The way you carry yourself. Your suit. That briefcase, I saw the initials. ACR custom leather. Very observant. And you haven't panicked. Haven't cried or screamed or done any of the things people usually do when they get arrested. Johnson had shifted his weight, clearly wrestling with something. You just keep watching everything. Taking notes in your head. Also observant. Amelia had leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something, Officer Johnson. How long have you worked with Marcus Webb? 3 months. Since I transferred here from the Baltimore courthouse. And in those 3 months, how many people has he stopped like this? People who look like me? Johnson's silence had been answer enough. That's what I thought. Amelia had sat back against the cold concrete wall. You seem like a decent man, Officer Johnson. You might want to think about whether you want your name attached to whatever happens next. He'd opened his mouth to respond, but Webb's voice had echoed down the hallway, and Johnson had hurried away. Now, alone in the cell, Amelia allowed herself a moment to feel the full weight of what had happened. The violation of it. The assumption that she was somehow less than, somehow criminal, somehow undeserving of basic respect or due process. She thought about her father, who'd endured countless traffic stops for driving while black. Her mother, who'd been followed through department stores by suspicious clerks. Her brother, who'd been handcuffed by police at 16 for the crime of waiting for a bus in his own neighborhood. This was the inheritance of black Americans, the constant proving, the perpetual suspicion, the exhausting labor of convincing the world of your humanity. But Amelia had something her ancestors hadn't possessed, power. Institutional power. Legal power. The kind of power that men like Marcus Webb thought belonged exclusively to people who looked like him. He was about to learn differently. At 8:15, she heard footsteps approaching. Multiple sets. Voices, urgent and confused. Then Court Administrator Patricia Reynolds appeared outside the cell, her face pale with shock. Oh my God, Patricia breathed. She was a thin white woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the efficient manner of someone who'd run courthouse operations for 2 decades. Behind her stood Chief Security Officer Raymond Foster, a black man in his 60s whose expression had gone from confusion to rage. Judge Richardson. Patricia's hands were shaking as she fumbled with the cell keys. What, how, who did this? Officers Webb and Johnson, Amelia said calmly, standing as the cell door swung open. Approximately 45 minutes ago. On the courthouse steps. Raymond's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. That son of a, he stopped himself, visibly struggling for control. Judge, I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. This never should have, we had your photo distributed to all security personnel. They were specifically told. Apparently Officer Webb doesn't pay attention during briefings. Amelia stepped out of the cell, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. Or perhaps he simply didn't believe a black woman could be a federal judge. Patricia looked like she might cry. We need to get you cleaned up. Your 9 o'clock docket, we can postpone, of course. Issue a continuance. Under the circumstances. No. Amelia's voice was firm. The docket proceeds as scheduled. But Judge Richardson, you've just been. I'm aware of what I've just been, Patricia. Amelia accepted her briefcase from Raymond, checking that everything was still inside. Her papers were there, slightly crumpled but intact. And that's precisely why we're going forward. Where's my robe? In your chambers, but. Good. Then I have 30 minutes to prepare. Amelia started walking toward the elevator, her heels clicking with renewed purpose. Raymond, I want Officers Webb and Johnson in my courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp. Not in uniform. As defendants. Raymond's eyes widened. Ma'am. You heard me. They assaulted a federal judge, violated my civil rights, and falsely imprisoned me. That's not an administrative matter. That's federal crimes. She pressed the elevator button, her reflection appearing in the polished steel doors, torn jacket, disheveled hair, but eyes blazing with righteous fury. And I'm going to make sure everyone sees exactly what they did. Patricia and Raymond exchanged glances. Then Raymond pulled out his radio. All units, this is Chief Foster. I need Officers Webb and Johnson detained immediately and escorted to courtroom 4A. They are not to leave this building. Consider this a direct order. The radio crackled with confused responses, but Raymond ignored them. He looked at Amelia with something like awe. For what it's worth, Judge, I'm glad you're the one on the bench today. Amelia stepped into the elevator, allowing herself the smallest smile. So am I, Chief. So am I. The judge's chambers were exactly as she'd left them the previous afternoon, her law books arranged by subject on the shelves, the framed photo of her parents on the corner of the desk, the view of the city stretching out through the window. But everything felt different now. The room that should have been her sanctuary had become a war room. Amelia caught her reflection in the window glass. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, exposing the white blouse beneath. There were scuff marks on her skirt where she'd been shoved against the security vehicle. Her carefully styled hair had come loose from its pins, strands falling around her face. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd been manhandled and humiliated. Perfect. She wouldn't change. Wouldn't fix her appearance or hide the evidence of what had been done to her. When she walked into that courtroom, every lawyer, every defendant, every observer would see exactly what Marcus Webb had done to a federal judge. Her clerk, Jennifer Hastings, knocked softly and entered without waiting for a response. Jennifer was a sharp young woman, fresh out of Yale Law, who'd clerked for Judge Morrison before his retirement. Her eyes went wide when she saw Amelia's condition. Judge Richardson, Patricia just called and told me, are you all right? Should I call a doctor? I'm fine, Jennifer. Amelia pulled her robe from the closet, the heavy black fabric feeling like armor. What's the status of the 9 o'clock docket? Everyone's here. 2 attorneys for the motions to dismiss, the defendant and counsel for the preliminary hearing, and the sentencing case. But Judge, we can reschedule. No one would question. We're proceeding. Amelia slipped the robe over her damaged suit. The weight of it settled on her shoulders, a reminder of the authority she carried. I want you to add one more case to the docket. Emergency hearing. United States vs. Marcus Webb and Thomas Johnson. Jennifer's pen froze over her notepad. The security officers. The same. Amelia moved to her desk, pulling out a legal pad. Her hand was steady as she began writing. Charges: assault under color of law, deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, and violation of civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 242. I'll be filing the complaint personally. You're going to prosecute your own case. Jennifer's voice rose with disbelief. No. I'll be presiding over it. Amelia looked up, meeting her clerk's eyes. I want the U.S. Attorney's Office contacted immediately. Tell them I need a prosecutor here within the hour. And Jennifer? Make sure they send someone senior. This isn't a case for a junior AUSA cutting their teeth. Jennifer was already pulling out her phone. What about defense counsel for Webb and Johnson? They'll have to arrange their own representation. Though I suspect the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association will provide someone. Amelia checked her watch, 8:43. How much of this morning's incident was captured on courthouse cameras? I don't know, but Raymond's already pulling the footage. He said. Jennifer hesitated. He said it's bad, Judge. Really bad. Good. The word came out harder than Amelia intended. She softened her voice. I mean, it's good that there's evidence. The truth needs to be documented. A sharp knock interrupted them. Patricia Reynolds entered, followed by a man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being the most important person in any room. He was white, probably late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses and yacht clubs. "Judge Richardson, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Bradford Whitmore," Patricia said. "He's the head of the Civil Rights Division." Whitmore extended his hand, and Amelia shook it firmly. His grip was appropriately professional, but his eyes were scanning her appearance, cataloging every torn seam and scuff mark. "Judge Richardson, I came as soon as I heard. This is absolutely unconscionable." His voice carried the crisp authority of Boston Brahmin education, probably Harvard undergrad, maybe Yale Law. "I want you to know that my office will pursue this matter with every resource at our disposal." "I appreciate that, Mr. Whitmore." Amelia gestured for him to sit. "But I need to be clear about something. This isn't just about what happened to me personally. This is about a pattern of behavior that's been allowed to continue unchecked." "I understand completely." Whitmore pulled out a tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. "I took the liberty of pulling Officer Webb's personnel file on my way over. Judge, this man has 17 complaints filed against him in the last 5 years. 17. Every single one from a person of color. And not one resulted in disciplinary action beyond a written warning." Amelia felt the anger crystallize in her chest. 17. Mostly minor incidents. Aggressive questioning, inappropriate searches, what his supervisors called overzealous application of security protocols. But there's a clear pattern. Whitmore looked up from his tablet. 3 of those complaints specifically mentioned racial slurs. One woman, a Latina attorney, claimed Webb told her she should be cleaning the courthouse, not practicing law in it. And nothing was done. His union defended him. His supervisors wrote it off as misunderstandings or he said she said situations. And honestly, Judge. Whitmore's expression hardened. I think some of them just didn't care. These were complaints from public defenders, legal aid attorneys, defendants' families. People without power. People like me, you mean? Before today. Amelia stood, moving to the window. Below, she could see the courthouse steps where Webb had grabbed her. Where he'd called her ghetto, had dismissed her humanity with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences. How many other people has he done this to, Mr. Whitmore? How many other black women, Latino men, Asian families has he harassed and humiliated? People who couldn't fight back because they didn't have a law degree or a federal appointment. Based on the pattern, I'd estimate dozens. Maybe more. Whitmore closed his tablet. That's why this case matters, Judge Richardson. Not just because of what he did to you, though that alone is a federal crime, but because you have the platform to expose the entire rotten system that protected him. Amelia turned back to face him. Then let's make sure we do this right. I want every complaint pulled. Every video from every camera in this building for the last 2 years. Interview every person of color who's filed a report against Webb. Build me an airtight case. Consider it done. Whitmore stood. Though I have to ask, are you sure you want to preside over this? Most judges would recuse themselves given your personal involvement. Most judges haven't been dragged down courthouse steps in handcuffs, Amelia said quietly. I'm the victim, yes. But I'm also the only person in this building with the authority and the standing to make sure this never happens again. Webb chose the wrong woman to brutalize, Mr. Whitmore. And I'm going to make certain that means something. Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Judge, it's 5 minutes to 9. Everyone's waiting in the courtroom. Amelia straightened her robe, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. In a few moments, she would walk into her courtroom for the first time as a sitting judge. But not in the way she'd imagined during all those sleepless nights preparing for this day. She'd imagined dignity. Respect. The weight of history as she took her place on the bench. Instead, she would walk in wearing the evidence of assault. She would face a courtroom full of people who would see her torn clothes and know that even a federal judgeship couldn't fully protect a black woman from racism's violence. But they would also see her standing. Fighting. Refusing to be diminished. "Let's go," Amelia said. And she walked out to claim her courtroom. The courtroom fell into absolute silence the moment Amelia entered through the judge's entrance. She'd walked this route during her orientation last week, practicing the path from chambers to bench, getting comfortable with the space. But that had been an empty room, echoing with possibility. Now it was packed with people, and every single one of them turned to stare as she emerged. The reaction rippled through the crowd like a wave. She heard the sharp intake of breath from the front row, where two attorneys in dark suits had been reviewing their notes. Saw the elderly court reporter's hand fly to her mouth. Watched as the bailiff, a seasoned veteran named Jerome Washington who'd worked these halls for 30 years, went rigid with shock. Because they could all see it. The torn jacket beneath her robe. The disheveled hair. The raw marks on her wrists where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin. "All rise," Jerome's voice cracked slightly, then strengthened. "The Honorable Judge Amelia Catherine Richardson presiding. This court is now in session." Amelia climbed the steps to the bench, feeling the weight of every eye on her. She took her seat with deliberate dignity, arranging her robe, placing her hands flat on the desk in front of her. From this vantage point, she could see the entire courtroom, the attorneys at their tables, the court staff at their stations, the gallery filled with defendants and families and law students who'd come to observe. And in the back row, flanked by two uniformed officers, sat Marcus Webb and Thomas Johnson. Webb's face had gone from its earlier confidence to something approaching confusion. Johnson looked like he might be sick. "Please be seated," Amelia said. Her voice carried through the courtroom with perfect clarity, amplified by the microphone but needing no technological assistance. "Before we begin with the scheduled docket, I need to address an incident that occurred this morning." She paused, letting the silence build. In the gallery, she saw phones being quietly pulled from pockets. Good. She wanted this recorded. She wanted it shared. At approximately 7:20 this morning, I arrived at this courthouse to prepare for my first day presiding over this courtroom. I was in professional attire, carrying my briefcase and legal materials. I was early, as I prefer to be, wanting time to settle into my chambers before the official start of the court day. Amelia kept her voice level, almost conversational, but every word landed like a gavel strike. As I approached the courthouse entrance, I was stopped by Courthouse Security Officer Marcus Webb. In the back row, Webb shifted in his seat. The officers on either side of him moved fractionally closer. Officer Webb demanded to know what I was doing at the courthouse. When I explained that I had business inside, he questioned my credibility. He suggested I was here for a child support hearing. He asked if I was trying to coach my baby daddy on how to lie in court. Amelia's eyes found Webb across the crowded room. When I identified myself as an attorney with legitimate business in this building, Officer Webb laughed. He told me, and I quote, "Get your ghetto ass away from here. This is for real people." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. One of the attorneys in the front row, a young black woman, had tears streaming down her face. "Order," Amelia said quietly, and the room fell silent again. Officer Webb then physically grabbed me, twisting my arm behind my back. He placed me in handcuffs. He and Officer Johnson forcibly removed me from the courthouse steps, dragging me to a security vehicle while I was handcuffed and unable to defend myself. I was then taken to a holding cell, where I was detained for approximately 40 minutes. She held up her wrists, showing the red marks to the entire courtroom. "These are the results of those handcuffs. This torn jacket is the result of being manhandled by officers who assumed that a black woman in a professional suit could not possibly belong in a federal courthouse except as a defendant or a problem to be removed." Bradford Whitmore stood from his seat at the prosecution table. "Your Honor, if I may address the court." "You may, Mr. Whitmore." For the record, I am Assistant U.S. Attorney Bradford Whitmore, head of the Civil Rights Division. Your Honor, the United States is filing formal charges against Marcus Webb and Thomas Johnson for assault under color of law, deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, and violation of civil rights under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. These are federal felonies carrying sentences of up to 10 years in prison. The whispers started again, louder this time. Webb was on his feet, his face flushed red. This is ridiculous. I was doing my job. I didn't know she was a judge. Officer Webb, sit down, Amelia's voice cut through the commotion like a blade. You'll have your opportunity to speak through your attorney. I don't need an attorney. This is a setup. Webb's voice rose, tinged with desperation now. She was acting suspicious. She wouldn't follow proper protocols. I said sit down. Amelia's tone dropped to something cold and absolute. Or I will have you removed from this courtroom and held in contempt. The officers on either side of Webb pulled him back into his seat. Johnson had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Amelia turned her attention to the courtroom at large. I want to be absolutely clear about something. What happened to me this morning was not an isolated incident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was the predictable result of systemic bias, unchecked authority, and the assumption that people who look like me do not belong in positions of power. She let that sink in, watching faces in the gallery process her words. Some nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. A few, mostly older white men, crossed their arms defensively. Officer Webb has 17 documented complaints against him, Amelia continued. 17 instances where people of color reported harassment, inappropriate searches, racial profiling, and verbal abuse. 17 times that the system looked at those complaints and decided they weren't serious enough to warrant meaningful action. Her voice hardened. Well, they're serious now. Because this time, Officer Webb didn't harass a defendant or a public defender or a family member. He assaulted a federal judge. And that means this stops today. She glanced at her notes, then back up at the packed courtroom. Mr. Whitmore, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into security practices at this courthouse. I want every complaint filed against Officer Webb reviewed. I want video footage from courthouse cameras for the past 2 years examined. And I want interviews conducted with every person of color who has reported mistreatment by courthouse security. Yes, Your Honor. We've already begun that process. Good. Amelia turned to Jerome. Bailiff Washington, please approach. Jerome stepped forward, his weathered face carefully neutral, but his eyes were bright with emotion. Mr. Washington, you've worked in this courthouse for 30 years. In that time, have you ever witnessed security officers engaging in discriminatory behavior? Jerome hesitated for only a moment. Then he squared his shoulders. Yes, Your Honor. I have. Can you give this court an example? Last month, I watched Officer Webb stop a young black man in a suit, carrying a briefcase. The man was an attorney, I recognized him from other cases. But Webb made him empty the briefcase, questioned him about why he was in the building, asked to see his bar card 3 times even after the attorney showed it to him. Jerome's voice strengthened. Meanwhile, 3 white attorneys walked past without being stopped at all. Did you report this? I did, Your Honor. Filed a complaint with Chief Foster. And what happened? Nothing. Webb got a verbal warning. That was it. Amelia nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Washington. You may return to your post. She looked out over the courtroom again. Does anyone else in this courtroom have similar experiences they'd like to share? Any attorneys, defendants, family members, or staff who have witnessed or experienced discriminatory treatment by courthouse security? Hands started going up. First 1, then 3, then a dozen. The young black attorney in the front row stood, her voice shaking but clear. Your Honor, my name is Kendra Williams. I'm a public defender. Officer Webb has stopped me at least 6 times in the past year. He's asked to see my ID every single time, even though he's seen me in this building dozens of times. He's never stopped my white colleagues. Not once. An older Latino man stood next. I'm Roberto Vasquez. My son had a hearing here last year. Webb made me wait outside in the cold for 20 minutes, said the building was at capacity. But I watched white families walk right in. When I complained, he threatened to have me arrested for disturbing the peace. More voices joined in, a chorus of experiences that painted a damning picture. And through it all, Marcus Webb sat in the back row, his face growing paler with each testimony, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog. Amelia listened to every single story. She made notes. She asked follow-up questions. She treated each person with the dignity and respect that Webb had denied them. And when the last testimony was given, she looked directly at Marcus Webb. Officer Webb, you claimed you were just doing your job. That you were following protocols. That you had no way of knowing I was a judge. She paused, letting the weight of all those testimonies settle over the courtroom. But the evidence suggests something very different. The evidence suggests you made assumptions based on the color of my skin. Just like you've done with dozens of other people. The difference is, this time you assaulted someone with the power to hold you accountable. She glanced at Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, I want Webb and Johnson arraigned today. I want bail set. And I want this case moved forward with all due speed. Yes, Your Honor. Amelia finally allowed herself to look at the clock. It was 10:15. An hour and 15 minutes had passed since she'd called the court to order. We'll take a 15-minute recess before proceeding with the scheduled docket. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. The chambers felt smaller when Amelia returned, as if the walls had contracted during the hearing. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to feel the tremor in her hands, the adrenaline crash that followed righteous fury. Jennifer appeared within seconds, carrying a cup of tea that Amelia hadn't asked for but desperately needed. That was. Jennifer searched for words. Judge, I've clerked for 2 federal judges, and I've never seen anything like what just happened in that courtroom. Amelia accepted the tea, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. What I did, calling for testimony like that, turning my courtroom into a public forum, that wasn't exactly by the book. Maybe not. But it was necessary. Jennifer sat down across from her. Those people needed to be heard. Some of them have probably been carrying those experiences for years, thinking no one would believe them or care. Webb certainly didn't think anyone would care. Amelia took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. 17 complaints, Jennifer. 17 times people tried to report him, and nothing changed. You want to know what that tells me? That the system was broken. That the system was working exactly as designed. Amelia set down the cup. It protected Webb because people like him are seen as the default. The normal. The ones who belong. And everyone else, everyone who looks like me or Roberto Vasquez or Kendra Williams, we're the ones who have to constantly prove we have a right to exist in these spaces. A knock interrupted them. Bradford Whitmore entered, followed by a woman Amelia didn't recognize. She was Asian American, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and the crisp demeanor of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. Judge Richardson, this is Special Agent Lisa Chen from the FBI's Civil Rights Division, Whitmore said. I've asked her to lead the investigation into Officer Webb. Chen extended her hand. Your Honor, I've already pulled the security footage from this morning. With your permission, I'd like to show you what we found. Amelia gestured to Jennifer's laptop. Go ahead. Chen pulled up the video file, and suddenly Amelia was watching herself from a high angle, a security camera positioned above the courthouse entrance. The timestamp read 7:18 a.m. She watched herself climb the steps, professional and composed, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Then Webb appeared in the frame, jogging toward her with aggressive purpose. Even in the grainy footage, his body language was unmistakable, confrontational, invasive, designed to intimidate. "Watch this part," Chen said quietly, advancing the video. "This is when you identify yourself as an attorney." On screen, Amelia saw herself gesture toward the building, clearly explaining her purpose. Webb's response was immediate. He moved closer, invading her space, his finger jabbing toward her face. "Now here's where it gets interesting." Chen pulled up a second window. This is footage from the same camera, same location, same time period, 7:15 to 8 a.m., but from different days over the past 6 months. The screen split into multiple frames, each showing the courthouse entrance at early morning hours. Amelia watched as white attorneys, judges, and staff members walked past Webb without being stopped. Some nodded at him. He nodded back. No confrontations. No demands for identification. No questioning of their right to be there. Then Chen switched to another set of clips. And here's footage of Officer Webb interacting with people of color during the same time periods. The difference was stark. Every single person of color was stopped. Questioned. Asked for identification. In one clip, Webb physically blocked a young black man from entering, his arms crossed, his stance aggressive. In another, he followed a Latina woman up the steps, staying close behind her in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "There's more," Chen said. She pulled up audio files. Webb wears a body camera as part of courthouse security protocol. The footage is stored on secure servers. Most of it is routine, but we found some interesting conversations. She pressed play. Webb's voice crackled through the laptop speakers, caught in conversation with another security officer Amelia didn't recognize. "I'm telling you, it's getting ridiculous," Webb was saying. "These people think they can just walk in here like they own the place. Yesterday, had some black chick claiming she was a lawyer. Yeah, right. Probably couldn't even spell lawyer." The other officer laughed. "What did you do?" "Made her show me every piece of ID she had. Bar card, driver's license, business cards. Then I made her wait while I called her supposed law firm to verify. Took 40 minutes. By the time she got in, she'd missed her filing deadline." More laughter. Then Webb's voice again, darker now. "That's how you handle them. Make it difficult. Make it uncomfortable. Eventually, they'll learn this isn't their world." The recording stopped. The silence in Amelia's chambers was deafening. "There are 7 more recordings like that," Chen said quietly. "All within the past year. All showing clear evidence of racially motivated harassment and deliberate obstruction of legal proceedings." Amelia felt something cold and clarifying settle in her chest. This wasn't just about what Webb had done to her. It was about systematic oppression, carried out by a man who believed his badge gave him the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. Special Agent Chen, how many cases could have been affected by Webb's behavior? How many filing deadlines missed? How many clients unable to meet with their attorneys? How many justice delayed because one racist security guard decided to make people jump through hoops? Potentially dozens, Your Honor. We're still investigating. Whitmore leaned forward. "Judge Richardson, this is bigger than we initially thought. Webb's actions may have compromised the integrity of multiple legal proceedings. We're looking at not just civil rights violations, but possible obstruction of justice charges." "Good." Amelia stood, moving to the window. Below, she could see the courthouse steps where it had all begun just hours ago. "I want every case reviewed. Every attorney he delayed, every defendant whose counsel couldn't reach them in time, every filing that was missed because Webb decided to play gatekeeper. If justice was denied because of his racism, those cases need to be examined." "That could take months," Whitmore said. "Then we'd better get started." Amelia turned back to face them. And I want Webb's arraignment this afternoon. I want him to stand in a courtroom and hear the charges against him. I want him to understand that his victims weren't powerless, they just hadn't found their voice yet. Chen closed her laptop. Your Honor, can I ask you something? How are you holding up? Most people who go through what you experienced this morning would need time to process. But you went straight into that courtroom, Anne. And I did my job, Amelia interrupted gently. The same job I'll do tomorrow and the day after. Because if I let what Webb did derail me, then he wins. And I didn't spend 20 years climbing to this position just to let a bigot with a badge knock me down. She straightened her torn jacket, feeling the fabric pull against the rip in the shoulder. Besides, she added, her voice taking on an edge of steel, Marcus Webb made a critical miscalculation. He thought I was someone without power. Someone he could brutalize without consequence. He was wrong. And now he's going to learn exactly what it costs to underestimate a black woman who refuses to be diminished. Jennifer smiled. What do you think Webb's thinking right now? Amelia returned to her desk, pulling up the afternoon docket that would include Webb's arraignment. I think, she said softly, he's finally starting to understand that he picked the wrong woman to drag down those steps. The afternoon session brought a different energy to the courtroom. Word had spread through the legal community with the speed of wildfire, social media posts, text messages, phone calls between attorneys who'd heard from colleagues who'd been there that morning. By 2 p.m., when court reconvened, every seat in the gallery was filled, and people lined the walls and the standing room-only spaces. They'd come to witness history. Or perhaps justice. Sometimes the two were the same thing. Amelia took the bench with the same torn jacket still visible beneath her robe, a deliberate choice that several reporters in the gallery immediately noted on their laptops. She'd been offered a spare blazer from Patricia's office, but she'd declined. The evidence of what had been done to her needed to remain visible. The court calls the matter of United States versus Marcus Webb and Thomas Johnson, she announced. Will the defendants please rise? Webb stood slowly, flanked by an attorney Amelia recognized, Gerald Hutchinson, a former prosecutor who now specialized in defending law enforcement officers. He was good at his job, which meant this wouldn't be easy. Johnson stood beside his own counsel, a younger woman named Rebecca Torres who looked like she'd drawn the short straw when assignments were handed out that morning. Whitmore rose from the prosecution table. Your Honor, the United States charges Marcus Webb with assault under color of law, deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, and violation of civil rights under Title 18, Section 242. We charge Thomas Johnson with aiding and abetting these offenses and failure to intervene to prevent civil rights violations. How do the defendants plead? Amelia asked. Hutchinson stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming under the courtroom lights. Your Honor, before we enter a plea, I must raise several concerns about these proceedings. My client maintains he was performing his duties as a security officer in good faith. The fact that the complainant happened to be a judge does not change the fundamental nature of a security screening. Your client didn't screen me, Mr. Hutchinson. He assaulted me. Amelia's voice was calm, but the words landed like hammer blows. There's a significant difference between asking for identification and dragging someone down courthouse steps in handcuffs while calling them ghetto. Hutchinson's jaw tightened. Your Honor, with all due respect, my client's actions were based on what he perceived as suspicious behavior. Suspicious behavior. Amelia leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hutchinson, I was a black woman in a professional suit carrying a briefcase. Please explain to this court exactly what about that was suspicious. The courtroom fell silent. Hutchinson opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly recalibrating his approach. Your Honor, my client maintains he would have acted the same way regardless of the complainant's race. Then let's test that claim. Amelia nodded to Special Agent Chen, who'd taken a seat at the prosecution table. Agent Chen, please present the video evidence we reviewed earlier. The courtroom's video screens flickered to life, showing the split-screen footage of Webb's interactions. On one side, white professionals walking past him without incident. On the other, people of color being stopped, questioned, delayed. The gallery erupted in whispers. One woman gasped audibly. Amelia heard someone in the back row mutter, "Oh my God." Hutchinson's face had gone pale, but he pressed on. "Your Honor, selective video clips don't tell the whole story." "Then let's hear the audio." Amelia gestured to Chin again. Webb's voice filled the courtroom, bragging about making that black attorney miss her filing deadline, joking about putting these people in their place. With each word, Amelia watched Hutchinson's defense crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. "Mr. Hutchinson," Amelia said quietly, "does your client still maintain his actions were not racially motivated?" Hutchinson looked at Webb, who'd gone rigid in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. For a moment, the attorney seemed to be having an internal debate. Then he straightened his shoulders with the resignation of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. "Your Honor, we enter a plea of not guilty and request bail be set." Not guilty. Amelia let those words hang in the air. Despite video evidence showing systematic racial profiling. Despite audio recordings of your client explicitly discussing discriminatory practices. Despite testimony from multiple witnesses. Despite the physical evidence of assault visible on my own body. She paused. "Mr. Hutchinson, I hope you're prepared for trial, because this case is going forward." She turned to Whitmore. "What is the government's position on bail?" "Your Honor, the government requests that Officer Webb be held without bail. He poses a significant flight risk, and given his position of authority, there's substantial risk he could intimidate witnesses or tamper with evidence." Hutchinson shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that's absurd. My client has served in law enforcement for 20 years. He has deep roots in this community. He's not going anywhere. He also has a demonstrated pattern of abusing his authority," Amelia countered. "And this court has a responsibility to protect potential witnesses, many of whom are people of color who may fear retaliation from someone who's shown such clear bias." What do you think Officer Webb was feeling in that moment? Do you believe people can truly change after being caught, or does it take public exposure to reveal who someone really is? Share your thoughts below, this conversation matters. She considered for a moment, weighing justice against precedent. Bail is set at $500,000. Officer Webb will surrender his passport and be placed under house arrest with electronic monitoring. Any attempt to contact witnesses will result in immediate revocation of bail. She looked directly at Webb. "And Mr. Webb, let me be very clear, if you violate any conditions of your release, you will spend the remainder of this case in a jail cell. Do you understand?" Webb's voice came out as a croak. "Yes, Your Honor." As for Officer Johnson. Amelia shifted her attention to the younger man, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Mr. Johnson, the evidence suggests you were following Officer Webb's lead, but you also had an obligation to intervene when you witnessed civil rights violations. Your failure to do so makes you complicit. However, I'm willing to consider that you may have been caught in a difficult position." Rebecca Torres stepped forward. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets his actions. He's prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation." "Cooperation is a good start, Ms. Torres." Bail for Officer Johnson is set at $100,000, same conditions as Officer Webb. Amelia made a note on her docket. Trial is set for 6 weeks from today. That should give both sides adequate time to prepare. "Mr. Whitmore, I expect your witness list and evidence filing within 2 weeks." "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Hutchinson?" Amelia met the defense attorney's eyes. "I suggest you have a very frank conversation with your client about the strength of the evidence against him. Because if he takes this to trial, I will ensure every piece of that evidence is presented in excruciating detail. Every victim he harassed will have the opportunity to testify. Every racist comment he made will be played for the jury. Every assumption he made about who belongs and who doesn't will be exposed. Hutchinson nodded stiffly. Understood, Your Honor. Good. This court stands in recess. The gavel fell, and Amelia watched as bailiffs led Webb and Johnson away. Webb's earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. He'd thought he was untouchable. Protected by his badge, his union, his assumptions about power and race and who the system was designed to serve. He'd been wrong. And now, Amelia thought as she rose from the bench, he would pay for every assumption, every slur, every time he'd made someone feel less than human. Justice, she'd learned long ago, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, it was absolute. The 6 weeks before trial passed in a blur of preparation, media attention, and mounting evidence. Amelia's case had become national news. #Judge Richardson trended on social media for 3 days straight, and cable news programs dissected every angle of the story. Some praised her courage. Others questioned whether she should have recused herself. A few commentators, inevitably, suggested she'd been too aggressive or played the race card. Those criticisms stung less than they might have years ago. Amelia had learned that black women in positions of authority would always be scrutinized more harshly, their competence questioned, their motives suspect. The only response was to do the work so thoroughly that criticism became white noise. And the work was overwhelming. Special Agent Chen's investigation had uncovered far more than anyone anticipated. 43 people came forward with complaints against Webb, dating back nearly a decade. The stories were remarkably consistent: racial profiling, verbal harassment, deliberate delays, and in several cases, physical intimidation. One young law student described Webb following him to his car, standing so close the student could smell the coffee on his breath, telling him, "Boys like you should think carefully about whether law was really the right career choice." A Muslim woman attorney recounted Webb demanding she remove her hijab for a security screening, despite no such requirement existing in courthouse policy. When she refused, he detained her for 2 hours, causing her to miss a critical hearing. An elderly black man had been pushed to the ground by Webb after moving too slowly through the metal detector. He'd broken his hip in the fall. The incident had been written up as an accident. Bradford Whitmore's team compiled it all into a prosecutorial brief that read like an indictment of systematic racism, not just Webb's personal prejudices, but the institutional structure that had enabled and protected him for years. Every supervisor who'd dismissed a complaint. Every union representative who'd defended him. Every colleague who'd witnessed his behavior and said nothing. The night before trial, Amelia sat in her home office, reviewing her notes by lamplight. She'd recused herself from presiding, of course. Hutchinson had been right about that much. Judge Theodore Morrison, a 70-year-old white man with an impeccable reputation for fairness, would oversee the proceedings. But Amelia would be there as the primary witness, ready to tell her story under oath. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother, James: "Tomorrow's the day. Dad would be so proud of you." Amelia smiled, feeling the familiar ache of missing her father. He'd been a quiet man, never one for grand speeches, but he'd taught her everything about dignity in the face of disrespect. He'd come home from his postal route with stories about customers who'd called him slurs, supervisors who'd passed him over for promotions, police officers who'd pulled him over for no reason except the color of his skin. And every time, he'd handled it with grace and determination. "Don't let them make you small, baby girl," he'd told her once. "They'll try. Lord knows they'll try. But you're bigger than their hate. Remember that." She was remembering now. The courtroom the next morning was packed beyond capacity. Judge Morrison had to move the proceedings to the largest courtroom in the building, and even then, people were turned away. Media trucks lined the street outside. The story had captured something larger than one incident. It had become a referendum on justice, accountability, and whether the system could actually change. Amelia took her seat in the gallery, dressed in a navy suit with her mother's pearls. She'd considered wearing the torn jacket from that morning, but decided against it. The photographs were evidence enough. Today she would appear as what she was, a federal judge testifying in pursuit of justice. Webb sat at the defense table looking diminished. He'd lost weight in the past 6 weeks, his uniform replaced by an ill-fitting suit. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled papers. Johnson sat beside his own attorney, looking equally miserable. Judge Morrison called the court to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here for the trial of United States versus Marcus Webb and Thomas Johnson. Mr. Whitmore, is the government ready to proceed? Bradford Whitmore stood, commanding the room with practiced ease. We are, Your Honor. The United States will prove beyond reasonable doubt that Marcus Webb, acting under color of law, deliberately and systematically violated the civil rights of Judge Amelia Richardson and numerous other individuals based solely on their race. We will show that his actions on the morning in question were not an isolated incident but the culmination of years of discriminatory behavior enabled by institutional failures. He gestured to a screen where Webb's photo appeared alongside dozens of others, faces of every person who'd filed complaints, a visual representation of the scope of harm. Your Honor, this case is about more than one morning. It's about a man who weaponized his authority against the vulnerable. Who used his badge not to protect and serve, but to demean and control. Who believed, fundamentally, that certain people did not deserve the same dignity and respect as others. Whitmore paused, letting his words settle. The evidence will show that Marcus Webb is guilty on every count. And it will show that Thomas Johnson, through his complicity and silence, aided those crimes. Morrison nodded. Mr. Hutchinson, opening statement. Gerald Hutchinson rose slowly. Amelia could see the calculation in his eyes. He knew the evidence was damning, but he was being paid to mount a defense. Your Honor, members of the jury, my client Marcus Webb served this courthouse faithfully for 20 years. Was he perfect? No. Did he sometimes make errors in judgment? Perhaps. But the government wants you to believe that a man's entire career should be judged by one misunderstanding on one morning. Misunderstanding? Whitmore was on his feet. Your Honor. Morrison raised a hand. Mr. Whitmore, you'll have your chance. Continue, Mr. Hutchinson. Hutchinson cleared his throat. The defense will show that Officer Webb was following security protocols as he understood them. That in the confusion of an early morning encounter, mistakes were made on both sides. That the subsequent investigation has been motivated not by justice, but by a desire to make an example of a working-class officer who lacks the resources to defend himself against federal prosecution. It was a desperate strategy, Amelia thought. Paint Webb as the victim, suggest the prosecution was overreach, hope the jury's sympathy for a working man would outweigh the evidence of racism. It wouldn't work. The evidence was too overwhelming. But Hutchinson had to try. The government calls Judge Amelia Catherine Richardson, Whitmore announced. Amelia stood, feeling every eye in the courtroom follow her to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible, meeting the court clerk's eyes steadily. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. She sat, adjusting the microphone, and looked out over the courtroom. Webb was staring at her now, and for the first time, she saw something like fear in his eyes. Good, she thought. He should be afraid. Because she was about to tell the truth. All of it. Every humiliating moment, every racist assumption, every second of being treated as less than human. And this time, the whole world would be listening. Whitmore approached the stand, his expression respectful but determined. Judge Richardson, can you please tell the court what happened on the morning of your first day presiding? Amelia took a breath, centered herself, and began to speak. I arrived at the courthouse at approximately 7:15 a.m. Amelia's testimony lasted 3 hours. She recounted every detail with prosecutorial precision, the timeline, the words exchanged, the physical sensations of being grabbed, handcuffed, dragged. She described the sound of her jacket tearing, the bite of metal against her wrists, the humiliation of being marched past gathering crowds while Webb announced her supposed crimes. Whitmore guided her through it methodically, building a narrative that was impossible to dismiss or minimize. When he played the security footage, showing the incident from multiple angles, several jury members visibly flinched. One older black woman in the jury box had tears streaming down her face. "Judge Richardson," Whitmore said, "at any point during this encounter did Officer Webb ask for your identification before placing you in handcuffs?" "No. He made assumptions based on my appearance and dismissed my explanations." "And when you identified yourself as an attorney, how did he respond?" "He laughed. He said," Amelia paused, making sure every word was clear, "he said I couldn't possibly be an attorney. He suggested I was there for a child support hearing or to help someone lie in court." "Why do you believe he made those assumptions?" Hutchinson was on his feet. "Objection. Calls for speculation." "Your Honor," Whitmore countered, "Judge Richardson is an expert in civil rights law with 20 years of experience. She's qualified to assess discriminatory intent." Morrison considered. "I'll allow it. The witness may answer." Amelia looked directly at the jury. "Officer Webb made those assumptions because I'm a black woman. In his worldview, black women don't belong in courthouses except as defendants or problems to be removed. Everything about his behavior, his language, his aggression, his refusal to listen, stemmed from racial bias." Whitmore nodded. "Let's talk about that language. Can you repeat exactly what Officer Webb said to you?" "He told me to get my ghetto ass away from here. He said the courthouse was for real people." Amelia's voice remained steady, but she saw several jury members exchange disturbed glances. The implication was clear: I wasn't real. I wasn't legitimate. I didn't belong. When Whitmore finished, Hutchinson approached for cross-examination. He moved carefully, like a man navigating a minefield. "Judge Richardson, I want to be respectful of what you experienced," he began. "But isn't it possible that Officer Webb's behavior, while perhaps overzealous, was motivated by security concerns rather than racial animus?" "No," Amelia said simply. Hutchinson blinked. "You're certain?" "Mr. Hutchinson, I've reviewed the evidence. The videos showing Officer Webb allowing white people to pass without question while stopping every person of color. The audio recordings of him explicitly discussing racial targeting. The 43 complaints from other victims describing identical treatment. This wasn't security protocol. This was systematic racism. But you can't know what was in my client's mind. I know what came out of his mouth." Amelia's voice sharpened. "I know he called me ghetto. I know he assumed I was there for child support court. I know he told me the courthouse was for real people, implying I wasn't real. Actions reveal intentions, Mr. Hutchinson. Your client's actions revealed exactly what he thought of me." Hutchinson shifted tactics. "Judge Richardson, isn't it true that you went straight from being detained to presiding over a courtroom where you publicly called for testimony against my client? Doesn't that suggest a personal vendetta rather than—" "A personal vendetta?" Amelia leaned forward. "Mr. Hutchinson, your client assaulted a federal judge. He violated my civil rights. He humiliated me in public. And based on the evidence, he'd been doing the same thing to dozens of other people for years. Holding him accountable isn't a vendetta. It's justice." The cross-examination continued, but Hutchinson couldn't shake her testimony. Every question he asked, she answered with calm precision. Every attempt to minimize Webb's behavior, she countered with facts and evidence. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, Amelia felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. She'd told her truth. Now it was up to the jury. The prosecution's case continued over the next 3 days. Special Agent Chen testified about the investigation, walking the jury through video evidence that showed Webb's pattern of discrimination. The clips were damning: white attorneys waved through, black attorneys stopped and questioned. White families entering freely, Latino families delayed and searched. Then came the witnesses. One by one, they took the stand and shared their experiences. Kendra Williams, the public defender, describing how Webb had made her late to court appearances. Roberto Vasquez, explaining how his family had been denied entry while white families passed freely. The Muslim attorney recounting the hijab incident. The elderly man who'd been pushed and broken his hip. Each testimony built on the last, creating an overwhelming portrait of systematic abuse. By the third day, even Hutchinson seemed to have lost heart. His cross-examinations were perfunctory, going through the motions because his professional obligation demanded it. On day 4, Whitmore played the audio recordings. Webb's voice filled the courtroom, bragging about making that black attorney miss her deadline, joking about putting these people in their place, discussing strategies for making minorities feel unwelcome. The jury's expressions ranged from disgust to anger. The older black woman who'd cried during Amelia's testimony now sat with her arms crossed, her jaw set in righteous fury. The prosecution rests, Your Honor, Whitmore announced. Morrison turned to Hutchinson. Does the defense wish to present any witnesses? Hutchinson consulted quietly with Webb, whose face had gone ashen as he listened to his own recorded words. Finally, the attorney stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Marcus Webb. It was a desperate move, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Webb's own testimony was his last hope, a chance to humanize himself, to explain away the evidence, to convince the jury that he wasn't the monster the prosecution had portrayed. But as Webb took the stand, sweat beading on his forehead, his hands shaking slightly, Amelia knew this was a mistake. She'd seen enough defendants over the years to recognize when someone was about to self-destruct under questioning. Hutchinson led Webb through his background, 20 years of service, commendations for diligence, a clean disciplinary record apart from the complaints the prosecution had highlighted. Webb spoke in a monotone, clearly coached, describing his job duties and the challenges of courthouse security. Mr. Webb, Hutchinson said, can you explain what happened on the morning you encountered Judge Richardson? Webb cleared his throat. I was doing my job. The courthouse wasn't officially open yet, and I saw someone approaching the entrance. I went to inform them they'd need to wait. And when Judge Richardson identified herself as an attorney, I had concerns. She was arriving very early, before normal business hours. I wanted to verify her credentials. Is it standard procedure to verify credentials? Yes. We're required to ensure courthouse security. It sounded rehearsed, mechanical. The jury wasn't buying it. Amelia could see it in their body language, crossed arms, skeptical expressions, the way several of them glanced at the video screens that had shown Webb's discriminatory pattern. Then Whitmore stood for cross-examination, and the carefully constructed defense began to crumble. Mr. Webb, you testified that you verify credentials as standard procedure. Is that correct? Yes. Then why didn't you ask Judge Richardson for her credentials before placing her in handcuffs? Webb hesitated. She was being uncooperative. Uncooperative how? She had an attitude. She was confrontational. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Mr. Webb, we have video and audio of the encounter. Judge Richardson remained calm throughout. She explained her purpose, identified herself as an attorney, and asked you to let her pass. At what point was she confrontational? She wouldn't follow my instructions. What instructions? You didn't give her instructions. You made accusations. Whitmore picked up a transcript. You said, and I quote, "What do you think you're doing?" That's not an instruction. That's an accusation. Webb's face flushed. I was trying to secure the building. By assuming a professionally dressed woman with a briefcase was a criminal? I didn't assume. You told her to get her ghetto ass away from the courthouse. You said it was for real people. Mr. Webb, what did you mean by real people? The courtroom went silent. Webb opened his mouth, closed it, his eyes darting between Hutchinson and the jury. It was a poor choice of words. A poor choice of words, Whitmore repeated. Mr. Webb, in the audio recordings we played, you bragged about making a black attorney miss her filing deadline. You joked about putting these people in their place. Who are these people? I don't, that's taken out of context. What context would make those statements acceptable? Whitmore's voice rose slightly. What context makes it appropriate for a federal officer to deliberately interfere with legal proceedings based on race? That's not what I. Yes or no, Mr. Webb, did you treat people of color differently than white people? Webb's jaw worked. His attorney was half rising from his chair, but there was nothing Hutchinson could do. The question demanded an answer. I treated everyone according to security protocols, Webb finally said. That's not what I asked. Whitmore stepped closer to the witness stand. We have video evidence showing you waving white attorneys through while stopping every single person of color. We have recordings of you making explicitly racist statements. We have 43 complaints describing the same pattern of behavior. So I'll ask again, did you treat people of color differently? The silence stretched. Webb's hands gripped the armrests of the witness chair, his knuckles white. His voice cracked. I was doing my job. By assaulting a federal judge. By violating civil rights. By making people feel they don't belong in their own courthouse. Whitmore's voice carried throughout the room. Mr. Webb, the evidence shows you're guilty of every charge. The only question is whether you have the courage to admit it. Webb's face crumpled. For a moment, Amelia almost felt sorry for him, a man confronting the ugliness of his own prejudices, the consequences of actions he'd thought were protected and justified. Then she remembered his hands on her arms, his breath in her face, his voice telling her she wasn't real. The pity evaporated. No further questions, Whitmore said, returning to his seat. Webb left the witness stand looking like a broken man. And Amelia knew, watching him shuffle back to the defense table, that the trial was effectively over. The jury would deliberate, but the outcome was inevitable. Justice, finally, was coming. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. When the court clerk announced they'd reached a verdict, a ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Quick deliberations could mean many things, but in a case this complex, with this much evidence, it usually meant one thing: the jury had found the decision easy. Amelia sat in the gallery beside Bradford Whitmore, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the hammering of her heart. Around them, the courtroom had filled to capacity again: reporters, attorneys, members of the public who'd followed the case, and many of the 43 people who'd testified about their experiences with Webb. Judge Morrison took the bench. Has the jury reached a verdict? The jury foreperson, a middle-aged white man who'd served as an engineer before retirement, stood. We have, Your Honor. In the matter of United States v. Marcus Webb, on the count of assault under color of law, how do you find? Guilty. The word landed like a thunderclap. Someone in the gallery gasped. Webb's head dropped into his hands. On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty. On the count of false arrest. Guilty. On the count of violation of civil rights under Title 18, Section 242. Guilty. Morrison continued through every charge, and the answer remained the same. Guilty. 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 The weight of each verdict seemed to press Webb further into his chair until he looked like he might disappear entirely. In the matter of United States v. Thomas Johnson, Morrison continued, on the count of aiding and abetting civil rights violations, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of failure to intervene? Guilty. When the foreperson sat down, the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits, already typing on their phones. Several of Webb's victims were crying, embracing each other. Amelia felt Whitmore's hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. Justice, he said quietly. Finally. Morrison gavelled for order. Mr. Webb, Mr. Johnson, you've been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled for 30 days from today. Until then, both defendants will be remanded to federal custody. He paused, looking down at Webb with an expression that might have been pity or disgust. Mr. Webb, you took an oath to serve and protect. Instead, you used your authority to demean, harass, and assault the very people you were supposed to serve. You targeted them because of the color of their skin. You violated their rights because you believed your badge made you untouchable. Today, this jury has proven you wrong. Two marshals moved forward to take Webb into custody. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the same handcuffs he'd used on Amelia, he finally looked across the courtroom and met her eyes. She held his gaze steadily, letting him see everything she'd refused to show that morning on the courthouse steps. Her strength. Her dignity. Her absolute refusal to be diminished by his hatred. Then she looked away, dismissing him as thoroughly as he'd once tried to dismiss her. He was led out in silence, Johnson shuffling behind him, and Amelia stood to leave. But before she could reach the aisle, Kendra Williams was there, the young public defender who'd been one of the first to testify. Judge Richardson, Kendra's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you. For all of us who thought no one would believe us, who thought it didn't matter, thank you for showing us it does. Others gathered around. Roberto Vasquez, clasping her hand with both of his. The Muslim attorney, tears streaming down her face. The elderly man who'd broken his hip, leaning on his cane but standing straight with pride. You gave us our voices back, Roberto said. You made them listen. Amelia felt her own throat tighten with emotion. You always had voices. The system just wasn't listening. But it's listening now. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaotic. News crews surrounded the entrance, cameras and microphones creating a gauntlet. Amelia had prepared a brief statement with Whitmore, knowing this moment would come. She stood on the courthouse steps, the same steps where Webb had grabbed her, and faced the cameras. Today, a jury found Marcus Webb guilty of violating my civil rights and the civil rights of dozens of other Americans. This verdict isn't just about one morning or one incident. It's about accountability. It's about recognizing that badges and uniforms don't excuse racism. It's about saying that everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, especially in our halls of justice. She paused, gathering her thoughts. For too long, people of color have been telling stories like mine. Stories of being stopped, questioned, harassed, and brutalized for no reason except how we look. Too often, those stories have been dismissed, minimized, or ignored. I had a platform that allowed my story to be heard. But there are countless others who don't have that platform. This verdict is for them too. A reporter called out, Judge Richardson, what happens next? Next, we work to make sure this never happens again. I'm calling for comprehensive reform of courthouse security procedures nationwide. Training on implicit bias. Independent oversight. Clear protocols that don't leave room for discrimination. We're calling it the Richardson Protocol, and I'll be working with federal lawmakers to implement it at every courthouse in America. Another reporter, some critics say you were too personally involved in this case. How do you respond? Amelia smiled slightly. I was the victim of a federal crime. Yes, I was personally involved. But that didn't disqualify me from seeking justice, it qualified me to understand exactly what was at stake. Marcus Webb thought he could target me because I was a black woman, someone he assumed had no power. He was wrong. And now every officer who thinks they can abuse their authority needs to understand, your victims might be more powerful than you think. Justice isn't just for the powerful. It's for everyone. The questions continued, but Amelia politely excused herself. She had work to do. 3 months later. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed. Amelia sat at the witness table, flanked by civil rights advocates and law enforcement reform experts. The Richardson Protocol had gained momentum quickly, her case had sparked a national conversation about racism in courthouse security and law enforcement more broadly. Senator Patricia Gaines, who championed Amelia's judicial appointment, smiled from the dais. "Judge Richardson, thank you for being here today. Can you explain how the Richardson Protocol would change courthouse security nationwide?" Amelia leaned toward the microphone. "Senator, the protocol has three main components. First, mandatory bias training for all courthouse security personnel, with annual recertification. Second, independent oversight with a civilian review board that investigates complaints. Third, body camera requirements with footage automatically reviewed if any complaint is filed. The goal is transparency and accountability. And you believe this will prevent incidents like what happened to you? I believe it will make it much harder for officers like Marcus Webb to abuse their power repeatedly without consequence. One incident might slip through. 17 shouldn't. The system failed because there was no real oversight. The Richardson Protocol creates that oversight." The hearing continued for 3 hours. Amelia answered every question with the same precision she'd brought to Webb's trial. By the end, even the most skeptical senators seemed convinced. The protocol passed into law 6 months later, signed by the president in a rose garden ceremony where Amelia stood beside him, her torn jacket from that morning now housed in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. 1 year later, Amelia stood in her courtroom, truly her courtroom now, familiar and comfortable after a year of cases, and looked out at the packed gallery. She was about to preside over a precedent-setting civil rights case, and the legal community had turned out to watch. But before the docket began, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Marcus Webb was 7 months into a 10-year federal prison sentence. His appeals had all been denied. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association had expelled him. His wife had divorced him. His pension was gone, seized to pay restitution to his victims. Thomas Johnson had received 3 years, most of it suspended because of his cooperation with the investigation. He'd testified in 2 subsequent civil rights cases against other courthouse security officers, helping to expose a culture of discrimination that extended far beyond Webb. The Richardson Protocol had been implemented in federal courthouses nationwide. Early reports showed a 60% reduction in complaints from people of color about courthouse security. Training programs were being expanded. Oversight boards were investigating long-standing complaints that had been previously ignored. And Amelia had become something she'd never sought but had somehow earned, a symbol. Young black girls wrote her letters saying they wanted to be judges like her. Law schools invited her to speak. Civil rights organizations honored her work. But the moment she treasured most had come 3 months after Webb's conviction. She'd been leaving the courthouse late one evening when a young black woman in a business suit approached her nervously. "Judge Richardson, I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to say thank you. I'm a first-year associate at Morrison and Stevens. Last week, a courthouse security officer started questioning why I was there, and I thought about you. About how you didn't back down. So I stood my ground. I showed him my bar card and said I belonged there. And he backed off." The woman's eyes had filled with tears. "Because of you, I knew I didn't have to accept being treated like I didn't belong. So thank you." Amelia had hugged her, this young attorney she'd never met, and felt the weight of what her ordeal had accomplished. Not just Webb's conviction. Not just the protocol. But something more fundamental, a shift in consciousness, a refusal to accept the unacceptable. Now, standing at the bench in her courtroom, Amelia remembered her father's words, "Don't let them make you small, baby girl." She hadn't. Marcus Webb had tried to diminish her, to reduce her to his racist assumptions about who deserved respect and who didn't. Instead, she'd shown him, and the world, exactly who she was. A woman who wouldn't be silenced. A judge who wouldn't look away from injustice. A person who understood that power wasn't just about authority, it was about using that authority to protect the vulnerable, to stand up for the voiceless, to make the system work the way it was supposed to work. For everyone. Jerome Washington, her bailiff, approached with the morning's docket. He smiled at her with the warmth of someone who'd witnessed her journey from that terrible morning to this moment of strength. "Ready, Your Honor." Amelia straightened her robe, no longer torn, no longer bearing the evidence of assault, but carrying a different kind of weight now. The weight of responsibility. Of representation. Of a promise to do better, to be better, to make justice mean something real. "Ready," she said. And as the courtroom rose and Jerome called the court to order, Amelia Catherine Richardson took her seat on the bench and began the work she was born to do. Not just presiding over cases, but changing the world, one verdict at a time. 5 years after that morning on the courthouse steps, the American Bar Association awarded Judge Amelia Catherine Richardson their highest honor for judicial excellence and civil rights advocacy. In her acceptance speech, she said something that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. Marcus Webb thought he was dragging a problem down those courthouse steps. What he was actually doing was pulling the mask off a broken system. He thought he was putting me in my place. What he was actually doing was showing the world exactly where my place was, on the bench, demanding justice, refusing to be silent about racism in our courts. He thought he had the power. But power isn't about a badge or a uniform. It's about knowing who you are, standing firm in that knowledge, and never letting anyone convince you that you deserve less than dignity. That morning, Marcus Webb learned what real power looks like. And it looked like a black woman in a torn jacket who refused to bend. The audience had risen in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. And somewhere in that crowd, a young black girl sat next to her mother, watching Judge Richardson speak, and whispered, "That's what I want to be when I grow up." Her mother squeezed her hand and smiled. "Then that's exactly what you'll be, baby. Exactly what you'll be."
Thank you for watching. Want to show me some love and keep the videos coming? Simple like and subscribe. Ready for the next thrill? Click on the video popping up on your screen right now and enjoy more. See you in the comments.